Okay, so you want to own a brewery. Buy some tanks, brew something people love, open a taproom, and watch the pint glasses empty faster than you can fill them. Here's the first number that should stop you before you go any further. The Boston Beer Company, the people behind Samuel Adams, Twisted Tea, and Truly, brought in $1.965 billion in revenue in 2025. Sounds like the kind of number that ends every financial worry a person could have. Now look at what actually stayed behind after everything was paid for. $108.5 million in net income. That's a net margin of about 5.5%. One of the most recognized beer companies in America, with nearly $2 billion moving through it in a single year, and less than 6 cents of every dollar actually made it to the bottom line. That gap between the giant number coming in and the small number staying behind is the entire story of this business. Understand that gap and you understand brewing. Miss it and you can own one of the most beloved breweries in your city and still not survive it. Let's start with why anyone builds a brewery this large in the first place. Craft brewing alone generates $72.5 billion in economic impact across the United States every year, moving through nearly 9,800 breweries nationwide, with craft beer's retail dollar value alone sitting around $28 billion. That's an enormous amount of money sloshing through an industry most people picture as a guy in a garage with a fermentation bucket. But here's the part that surprises almost everyone stepping into this business for the first time. A brewery is not really one business. It's two businesses stapled together, a low-margin manufacturing operation and a high-margin hospitality operation, and almost every dollar of real profit lives in the second one, not the first. So before you spend a single dollar, you need to understand that not all brewing is the same business wearing a different hat. The nano brewery, producing under 1,000 barrels a year, can launch for as little as $10,000 to $150,000, built to prove a concept before scaling. The microbrewery, up to 15,000 barrels annually, the classic entry point, typically runs $250,000 to $1 million. The production brewery, built primarily for distribution rather than a taproom, requires $1 million to $3 million or more before a single can leaves the building. And the brew pub, half restaurant, half brewery, changes your entire cost structure, because now you're running two capital-intensive businesses under one roof instead of one. Here's the split almost nobody outside the industry understands. A taproom pint sells for around $8 and carries a gross margin close to 75%. That same beer, sold as a keg to a bar down the street through a distributor, generates roughly 30% of the revenue per ounce, compared to selling it yourself, across the bar, in your own building. The beer didn't get worse. The margin just evaporated the moment someone else poured it. The taproom isn't a nice-to-have next to the real brewing business. For most breweries that survive, the taproom is the real business, and the brewhouse is the cost center that makes it possible. Now, what does it actually cost to open the doors? The industry standard range runs from $250,000 to $1.5 million for a real, licensed operation. Here's where that money actually goes, and this is the part nobody warns you about. Core equipment alone, the brewhouse, the fermentation tanks, the glycol chiller, the canning line, averages around $500,000 for a genuinely well-capitalized operation. Commercial rent for a brewery-sized space runs $10 to $30 a square foot annually. A 5,000 square foot facility alone can mean $50,000 to $150,000 a year before a single barrel is brewed. Then come the licenses, federal TTB approval, state liquor licensing, local permits, a process that alone can take 4 to 12 months before you're legally allowed to sell anything. Add labor, which once you're staffed with brewers, taproom servers, and management, consumes around 30% of total revenue, the same benchmark as a quick-service restaurant, because that's structurally what a taproom actually is. But here's the trap inside the trap. None of what I just listed is the thing that actually kills new breweries. It's the ramp period, and specifically undercapitalization, by 40 to 60% of what the business actually needed. Not 5%, not 10%, almost half. New owners consistently budget for the equipment they can see, the shiny tanks, the brewhouse, and consistently under-budget the invisible things. Months of payroll before the taproom finds its rhythm, ingredient cost swings, and the slow trickle of compliance costs that show up long after the ribbon cutting. Miss that number and it doesn't matter how good your beer is. So let's say you've survived the setup. Now you need to understand the law that quietly shapes almost every financial decision you'll ever make in this business, a prohibition-era structure called the three-tier system. In most states, a brewery legally cannot sell directly to a retailer or a bar. You have to sell to a licensed distributor, who then sells to the retailer, who then sells to the customer. Distributor margin typically adds 25 to 30% on top of your price before it ever reaches a shelf. A $10 production cost becomes a $14 retail price, and none of that markup is yours. Here's the trap almost every new brewery falls into once they sign that distributor agreement. Many states have franchise laws that make it legally difficult or flat out impossible to terminate a distributor relationship once you've entered one. Even if your brand gets buried at the bottom of a portfolio of 1,000 other SKUs and effectively stops being sold at all, you signed away your own sales channel, permanently, to get access to the market in the first place. And there's a second structural trap hiding inside the federal tax code itself. Small brewers pay a federal excise tax of $3.50,000 barrels a year. Cross that line, and the rate doesn't creep up gradually. It jumps to $16 per barrel, more than 4 times higher on every barrel beyond it. A brewery growing successfully enough to approach that 60,000 barrel ceiling has to plan for a genuine cliff in its cost structure, not a gradual slope. Grow carelessly past that line without adjusting your pricing and margin model, and your best year can accidentally become the year your margins collapse. Now let's talk about what actually happens once the beer is flowing, because this is where the real education begins. Every batch is its own tiny economy split into direct and indirect costs. Direct costs, malt, hops, yeast, water, packaging, typically run 10 to 15% of revenue for ingredients alone, with packaging costs, especially aluminum cans, having climbed sharply in recent years. Indirect costs, taproom staff, marketing, administration, facility overhead, are where a business either stays disciplined or quietly bleeds. And labor deserves its own conversation, because the number on a brewer's paycheck is never the number they actually cost you. Say a brewer earns $22 an hour. Add roughly 15% for payroll taxes, about $3.30. Add another 8% for workers' compensation, $1.75. Add 15% for benefits, $3.30. That $22 worker is actually costing you close to $30 an hour. Estimate your staffing costs using the wrong number, and you've mathematically guaranteed yourself a thinner margin on every single hour of production, and you won't find out until the year-end books don't add up. Now, here's a real company, a real name, and a real collapse, because nothing teaches this lesson better than watching it happen to one of the most respected independent breweries in American craft beer history. Meet Stone Brewing. Founded in 1996 in San Diego, Stone became one of the defining names of the American craft beer movement. Bold, bitter, unapologetic, and for years, proudly, aggressively independent. Then came the expansion. In the mid-2010s, Stone poured roughly $29 million into converting an old gasworks in Berlin into a European production brewery, a number that ballooned well past that original estimate before the location closed just 5 years later, in 2019, with founder Greg Koch admitting the European market had been far harder to crack than anticipated. At almost the same time, Stone built a second American production brewery in Richmond, Virginia, a $74 million facility backed by $33 million in city and state bonds. Chasing East Coast distribution capacity, the company believed it needed to compete. Both expansions were funded substantially through private equity debt. By 2022, that debt load had grown to roughly $464 million, owed to investment firms VMG and Hillhouse. Stone did win one major victory along the way, a 5-year trademark lawsuit against Molson Coors over the branding of Keystone Light, ultimately awarded $56 million. It wasn't close to enough. In 2022, Stone Brewing sold to Sapporo USA for $165 million, a fraction of the debt it carried, and a fraction of what the brand, at its cultural peak, might once have been worth. The story doesn't end there. In January of 2025, Sapporo itself recorded a $91 million impairment charge on the deal, effectively admitting the acquisition hadn't delivered the returns it projected. And in 2026, Stone was sold again, this time to Duvel Mortgat's Firestone Walker, for an undisclosed sum, the second ownership change in 4 years, for a brand that once swore it would never sell out at all. So how does one of the most celebrated independent breweries in the country end up changing hands twice in 4 years? The answer isn't bad beer. Stone remained critically respected the entire time. The answer is structural. Stone grew through aggressive, debt-funded expansion into markets it didn't fully understand. At the exact moment craft beer's overall growth rate was slowing, and local, hyper-regional breweries were eating into the very growth Stone was betting on. It's the exact same forces already sitting inside your own business plan, if you're not careful. Thin core margins, expansion funded by debt instead of earned cash flow, and a brand identity built on momentum that quietly stopped matching the balance sheet underneath it. Keep that in mind the next time a second location, a new state, or a bigger production facility looks like the obvious next move. There's a second layer of risk sitting underneath everything else, and it has nothing to do with one bad expansion decision. It's the industry's cash flow plumbing itself. Distributors typically pay on 30 to 60-day terms, meaning a brewery that's already paid for ingredients, packaging, and labor weeks earlier is still waiting on the actual cash from that batch to arrive. Beer is also a perishable product. Unlike a construction material sitting in a warehouse, unsold inventory doesn't just tie up capital, it actively loses value and eventually has to be dumped, turning working capital directly into a write-off if the ramp period runs longer than planned. So who actually wins in this business? Almost never the brewery chasing the fastest possible distribution footprint across the most states. It's the breweries that treat the taproom as the actual core business, instead of a marketing add-on next to the brewhouse. They're building food programs, events, and what the industry now calls third space community programming around it. It's the breweries capitalized properly on day one, budgeting for double their equipment estimate rather than equal to it. And it's the ones who understand that limited, taproom exclusive releases, barrel-aged specialty beers, collaboration drops, anniversary batches, function exactly like a construction company's change orders, priced at a real premium, sold directly with no distributor cut, and quietly responsible for a disproportionate share of actual annual profit. An owner's income in this business comes from 2 places: a regular salary and a year-end profit distribution, similar to any other capital-intensive small business. A small independent brewery owner might land somewhere between $50,000 and $120,000 a year in total personal income in the early years. The owner of a scaled, taproom-first operation that's mastered its cash flow and its distributor relationships can take home $200,000 to well over $500,000 annually. Same industry, same tanks, same physical brewing process. The difference was never the quality of the beer. It was the discipline of the business sitting behind it. Now let's do the math the way any serious brewery owner would, because the 2-scenario ending is the only honest way to close this out. The optimistic scenario: you're running a taproom-first microbrewery, doing $1.2 million in annual revenue at a healthy 15% net margin. That's $180,000 in profit for the year. Your ingredient costs stayed roughly where you budgeted. Your taproom built a genuine local following, and your limited releases sold out every single time, adding a real cushion on top of your base pint sales. Life is good. The realistic scenario: aluminum can prices spike the way they have in recent years, and you didn't lock in pricing. A slow 6-month ramp turns into 18 months before the taproom finds its footing, burning through the cash reserve you budgeted. Your regional distributor, squeezed by rising costs of its own, pushes your payment terms from 30 days to 60, and now you're financing 2 months of ingredient purchases out of a line of credit just to keep the tanks full. Run that same $1.2 million year through that reality, and your 15% margin doesn't just shrink, it can flip into an outright loss, while the taproom, right up until the numbers finally caught up, looked exactly as full and exactly as loved by its regulars as it did the year the margins were healthy. So is owning a brewery worth it? It gives genuinely skilled brewers a real path to build something people are excited to visit, in an industry with real cultural weight and real community loyalty behind it. But it demands an owner who treats the business less like a brewer and more like a hospitality operator who happens to manufacture the product on site. Someone who understands the 3-tier system, distributor payment terms, and burdened labor rates as fluently as they understand mash temperatures and hop schedules. Every number in this script, the thin core margins, the distributor lock-in, the excise tax cliff, the fine print buried inside a distribution agreement, exists for one reason. It filters out the people who wanted to brew great beer from the people who actually understand what they're building. The tanks, the taproom, and the recipes are the easy part. What separates the brewery still pouring pints in year 10 from the one that quietly changes hands twice in year 4 is whether the owner treated their own cash flow with the same seriousness they treated their beer.